I think part of this DEI stuff, insofar as we insert it in younger children, implies that if you're not of European ancestry, you're not going to do as well in this country. Do you think when we talk about how we're down on people of certain demographics, it causes any defeatism in those students?
Well, we certainly don't want to have the bigotry of low expectations.
But do we actually know what one of the leading causes of school absenteeism is? Asthma. Asthma. I represent the Bronx. I represent kids whose only meal that they'll eat in an entire day will be from school. I represent kids whose the cleanest air that they'll breathe in their entire day, maybe if they're lucky, will be from their school. That the safest place that they will be in a day will be their school. And so when we come here, we talk about schools, but if you close your eyes and put yourself in a classroom of someone else's district, you'll see that the challenges are different here. So this is not about what we're teaching about European versus non-European descent.
This amendment would prevent the Secretary of Defense from creating any new DEI positions or filling any vacant DEI positions within the Department of Defense. Over the last few years, the DEI bureaucracy across the Department of Defense has infiltrated every unit, command, and school. Elevating immutable characteristics like race and color over all other factors is blatantly discriminatory. It harms public confidence in our military and makes us a less lethal fighting force. For our national security, we must uphold the ideals of our country and put merit, hard work, dedication, and service above all.
The only way this makes any sense is if you buy into this argument, we're past all of that, okay? Racism doesn't happen anymore. Okay? It's just not out there. It's not something we need to worry about. And I may need an additional 30 seconds, but I want to read you something from David French, who is a conservative columnist who adopted a 2-year-old Ethiopian. I need 30 more seconds.
I yield 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for another 30 seconds.
And conservative, but he happened to adopt a 2-year-old Ethiopian, and he's not a fan of Trump. So people started turning on him in his own church, in his own community. And he said the racism was grotesque. One church member asked my wife why we couldn't adopt from Norway rather than Ethiopia. Shout out to the former president for that one. A teacher at the school asked my son if we had purchased his sister for a loaf of bread. We later learned that there were coaches and teachers who used racial slurs to describe the few black students at the school. There were terrible incidents of pure racism, including a student telling my daughter that slavery was good.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Seconds.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
15
yield
seconds.
15 seconds.
Gentleman is
Slavery was good for black
seconds.
people because it taught them how to live in America. Another told her that she couldn't come to our house to play because my dad said black people are dangerous. Let's deal with this rationally and intelligently, not just throw everything out. Please preserve diversity and inclusion in our military and oppose this amendment.
Our national security deserves to be taken seriously. It deserves actual oversight. This hearing today and all the others before, since we're on part 3 now, are not serious. My Republican colleagues are so hell-bent on making a boogeyman that they're deliberately ignoring actual problems we can address, and in the process, actually undermining our national security. And while our national security must be a priority, it must also be balanced in a way that is not bigoted, xenophobic, or racist.
There's a book recently written by Christopher Rufo, which has received a lot of favorable comment, in which he goes back and finds communists in the 70s pushing this racial divide, trying to divide America by race. And of course, we have a lot of DEI professionals throughout the government now who I think their goal is to divide America. And eventually destroy America by setting one ethnic group against the other. Is that something you think that Red China would like to have, or to push the idea that people should view themselves as members of a subgroup rather than individuals?
Whatever it takes, they would like to win without fighting.
Right, that's exactly right. They believe that they're going to take over the United States. I think Khrushchev did, that they would take it over without a fight. And then this is the type of division that will cause them to destroy America when American congressmen push this DEI garbage.
Only focusing on China and the CCP not only leaves us vulnerable to attacks from elsewhere, but it also poses a risk to the personal safety, civil rights, and civil liberties of Chinese Americans and Chinese immigrants living in the U.S. We saw this with the Trump administration's China initiative. They said this was meant to protect labs and businesses from espionage. Instead, it was used as a tool of discrimination. Nearly 90% of the more than 150 cases brought by the FBI under the initiative were against ethnically Chinese people, and many of the cases were the result of simple administrative errors and no obvious connection to national security or the theft of intellectual property or trade secrets. So, Mr. Stokes, how did this initiative affect Chinese American scientists, and did this impact our research landscape?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. I think overall the initiative was I think the Justice Department has said that it fostered an environment of at least apparent bias, right, and had a bit of a chilling factor over the scientific community. So while on the one hand it is certainly right that China is seeking to steal our technological and scientific secrets, I think it is right to refocus the initiative on the actual networks at play rather than kind of casting aspersions over a broad group of people.
Thank you. It's giving major HUAC fillings right now. This was just McCarthyism in a new form. Under the initiative, scientists falsely accused of having ties to the CCP had their lives upended and their careers compromised. But Republicans want to bring back the China initiative. In fact, House Republicans recently passed a bill that would do just that, though under a slightly different name, the CCP initiative. Mr. Stokes, with changing the name of the China initiative to the CCP initiative without any concrete changes to its implementation, make it more effective at uncovering efforts to steal U.S. intellectual property?
I think the name does matter, but I think as you indicated, what actually goes on under the auspices of the initiative matters just as much, if not more. And again, because of the scope of the threat, to be able to be focusing resources on areas that aren't where the threat is actually emanating from, I think means we'll miss some of where the threat is actually emanating from. And so to the extent that you can revise the initiative to focus more on the real networks at play, it would be both more effective and more consistent with our values.
So the assumption that a person is more likely to be a CCP spy because they're Chinese or because someone might think they look Chinese is incredibly harmful, and we've seen it happen in this very committee. In January 2023, Chairman Comer appeared to repeatedly accuse Kathy Chung, a U.S. citizen born in South Korea, very much not China, who previously served as an aide to then Vice President Biden, of being a CCP spy. We've also seen how the rhetoric around China, particularly from Republicans, has led to increased discrimination against Chinese Americans and Chinese immigrants in the United States. Just look back at what was being said during COVID. Trump frequently referred to COVID-19 as, quote, the China virus, the Chinese virus, and Kung flu. He's kept this going using this phrase at the RNC just this past July, and just last week at a town hall in Michigan. This language led to a dramatic increase in anti-Asian hate between 2019 and 2021, and 1 in 3 members of the AAPI community experienced racial abuse in 2023. Mr. Stokes, can you explain how this kind of language can contribute to an increase in hate incidents and racial abuse against Chinese and other Asian Americans?
I would say, in general, the President of the United States has an immense agenda-setting power, and so to use language of that nature does contribute, and in certain cases may, even enable people to take, bias and racially motivated actions. But again, I think, at least from my expertise, that about how it relates to strategic competition with China, the fact that we can be an inclusive, diverse society that's governed by the rule of law is something we have that China doesn't, that is an asset that we should work very hard to retain.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. I just want to conclude by saying just the caution that when my colleagues speak about the CCP threat in careless or bigoted or xenophobic terms, they make all Chinese Americans and Chinese immigrants into a boogeyman, and it's wrong. We must talk about it in a way that gets very specifically at the harm, at the threats, and not in such a wide net that harms people who are innocent. I thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I want to make reference to a couple other documents before I discuss the bill. First of all, our Pledge of Allegiance, which we say every day. We pledge allegiance to the Republic for which we stand, right? The flag and the Republic for which we stand. When Benjamin Franklin, after our Constitution was ratified, he talked about giving us a republic if we can keep it. And I think people should analyze those two little quotes and wonder why there were references to republic in both of them. In any event, it kind of bugs me when people around here don't understand that. I think it's absolutely bizarre that to this point we have been sending out census forms and not asking the first question that you would figure would pop into your head. Are you a citizen? It's kind of embarrassing it hasn't happened up to this point. We have another problem in that there's some states declaring themselves sanctuary states or some sanctuary cities in which they seem to be encouraging people to come here who really shouldn't be in the country at all under current law. So in any event, I think this is a great bill. First of all, we should, in apportioning congressional seats, take into account people who are citizens, not people who are non-citizens, many of which I assume are going to return to the country they came from. And secondly, we expect on the form, the first thing that I look, they put things on their race. Sometimes in the surveys, they put on,
time
do
has
you own a
expired.
TV or that sort of thing. So in any event, it's something that should be
time has
expected. I'd like to
expired.
thank the gentleman from
Gentleman
Arizona
yields
again
back.
for giving me the 2
Arizona
minutes.
reserved. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I'm about to yield to my friend, Ms. Megan from New York, but I'm inspired by the remarks of the gentleman from Wisconsin, especially about the word republic, which of course comes from res publica, the public thing. He happened upon a subject that's of a lot of interest to me because I wrote a paper about it when I was in 6th grade, the Pledge of Allegiance. It was written by a radical Baptist minister named Francis Bellamy. I'm not sure if the gentleman's aware of that, on the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the New World. And Reverend Bellamy, who was an abolitionist in Vermont, was concerned about the continuing salute of the Confederate battle flag in the southern states. And so he wanted to write a flag salute that would be unifying for the Union. And he wrote, "I pledge allegiance to my flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, with liberty and justice for all." And you notice what is not in there. He did not have under God. That was added in 1954 by Congress, several weeks after the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education. But in any event, I'm not quite sure what the relevance is of the gentleman's invocation of the Republic or of Ben Franklin and the famous vignette about him saying, if you can keep it. Ben Franklin was, of course, a big supporter of immigration to the country, although he did display an anti-German bias in some of his writings. But I'll tell you a little story about Ben Franklin that might be of relevance to what the gentleman's talking about. Apparently, because I just did a tour in Philadelphia with the Ben Franklin people up there, and we learned this wonderful story. He made a loan to a friend of his for $100, and then he recorded in his diary that this gentleman he made a loan to for $100, Josiah, was always disappearing behind a tree or a building whenever Ben came along. And he finally caught up with him and he said, "Josiah, you know, I loaned you $100, and I'm wondering, am I going to be able to get my principal back, or at least the interest?" And Josiah said, "Well, Ben, look, the $100 is well invested somewhere else, so you don't have to worry about that." And Franklin said, "Well, what about the interest?" He said, "Well, I forgot to tell you that it's against my religion to pay interest, so I can't pay you the interest." So Franklin said, "You mean to tell me it's against your principal to pay me the interest, and it's against your interest to pay me the principal?" And Josiah said, "Well, that's right." So Franklin said, "Well, I can see I'm not going to get either." Well, look, here our principles and our interests converge very much. The principles are set forth in the Constitution, which is we count everybody, and everybody is part of the census, and everybody is part of the reapportionment process. It's been like that since 1790. We don't need to start finger painting on the Constitution with this silly election year proposal. But it's also in our interests because, as my colleagues have said, this is a land that is built on immigration, except for the Native Americans who are already here and the people who were brought over as slaves. All of us are the descendants of immigrants to this country. Tom Paine said when he got to America In 1774, 2 years before the revolution, he said, "This land, if it lives up to its principles, will become an asylum to humanity." Not an insane asylum, mind you. An asylum to humanity, a place of refuge for people seeking freedom from religious, political, and economic oppression. That's who we are. And every day I have in my office people from the hotel industry, people from the construction industry, people from the restaurant industry saying, we've got huge labor shortages. We need people in America. So I'm for a whole lot more lawful immigration to America, less unlawful immigration to America, like the deal that was worked out in the Senate that was rejected by the Republicans, and a lot less demagoguery about who we are as a country, because the census and reapportionment provisions in the 14th Amendment tell it all. This is a country that's for everybody, seeking opportunity and hope, willing to follow the law and follow our Constitution. With that, I will yield to the gentlelady from New York.
The Biden-Harris administration's open border policies have led to the worst border crisis in America's history by a mile. Millions of illegal immigrants have entered the United States under the Biden-Harris administration in a short period of time, affecting every community across the country. This was not the result of so-called root causes in Central America, as Kamala Harris has said. Individuals from all over the world have entered the U.S. Under the Biden-Harris administration. It's because they can. Obviously, we have the greatest country in the history of the world right now, I guess you could say, and it's not surprising that the whole world wouldn't try to come here. I should point out that in America, we are not anti-immigrant. Every year, about 850,000 new citizens are sworn into our country. If you look at it, sometimes there's a spike, but if you look at it in 3-year increments, there has never been a time in our history in which we have had more people sworn in as new immigrants. And what do we get for being so gracious and allowing so many people in this country? We get kicked in the face by having all other people come here anyway. Well, there's my opening statement, and I'll call upon my ranking member, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses also for being here. I think that obviously all folks in Congress, Republicans, Democrats, want a safe and secure border. I think what we have are different approaches to how we treat immigrants, a humane system, and ensuring that we don't go back to a process that was inhumane to people that are oftentimes struggling and just seeking a better life. We don't want to go back to family separation, to Muslim bans, to undermining our asylum system, and we know we can achieve a comprehensive goal that both has a secure border, but also a plan for immigrants that are here in this country and that are working hard to contribute to our economy and to our country. Now, legal pathways to ensure an orderly and humane process are important. Now, I strongly support legal immigration because we are a nation of immigrants. Immigrants are some of the most patriotic people I know in our country. They make our community stronger, they work hard, they build our country. I'm an immigrant. I came to this country as a young child. I love America. I think it's the best country on earth. When I raised my right hand, it was the proudest day of my life, and I'm giving back to this country. I try to every single day. And the same is true for everyone in my family who are also immigrants. But I also want to be clear why I think we're here today. It's because some folks in Congress, and certainly Donald Trump, think that bashing immigrants will win this election. Now, 2 weeks ago, during what was a bizarre debate performance, we saw, of course, the former president repeat manufactured conspiracies about immigrants, and in this case, Haitian immigrants in Ohio. As we now remember his horrible quote, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats, they're eating the pets of the people that live here, and this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame. Now, we know that's been completely debunked. The Republican governor of Ohio, the Republican mayor of the city manager, and now even the woman that first made the claim, who's also a Trump supporter in Springfield, all have said that this was not true. Yet the lie continues to be repeated. J.D. Vance and other members of Congress have continued to amplify this xenophobic lie, and it's a shame. And we know it gets worse. We know that Haitian immigrants in Springfield also are overwhelmingly there on legal work permits. They're actually there legally, and were invited by the state and the city to work. But that hasn't stopped J.D. Vance and Donald Trump from threatening to revoke their status and to allow a mass deportation agenda. Now, Donald Trump's rhetoric has been dividing us and stoking anti-immigrant hate, I believe, since he first came down that escalator in 2015 to announce that he thought Mexicans were rapists and murderers. And he says families like mine and other immigrants are poisoning the blood of this country. Those are the facts. Now, I'm glad to say that the American people, however, don't buy that. A CBS poll found that only 1/3 of voters approve of Trump's claims about immigrants, and almost 65% believe his recent claims are false, which we know that they are.
I'm disappointed that my good friend, Congressman Garcia, would try to confuse the American public. I've been down at the border 8 times. When I go down there, I frequently talk to the people who are in charge of debriefing or doing a health inspection on the new immigrants. They have told me that it is common for women who are coming across the border to be sexually assaulted. That ought to concern us all. Instead, what has happened when you try to bring up this idea that we want to stop the sexual assaults of women coming across the border, some Democrats say that this is a racial thing to say. Well, the border is to a large extent controlled by ruthless gangs. And it is very sad that the women who come here are being sexually assaulted. I don't know. Apparently, you're not supposed to say it or you're going to be accused of racism. It has nothing to do with racism. Yeah. It is pointing out, including all the other problems that you have with this massive border crossing, you are having women being assaulted by the Mexican gangs south of the Rio Grande. And if you go down there and talk to the people in charge of debriefing or whatever you'd say, the people coming across, they will tell you that. So it is not a racial statement. Donald Trump cares about women and does not like to see these women who are coming here sexually assaulted.
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And first of all, this is all a point of order. I mean, this is not a part of the way the hearing procedure works. But I will just respond. I do want to ask unanimous consent, since we're having this into the record, a September 17, 2024 article from Fox News titled "Border Patrol Apprehends 58,000 Migrants in August, down from the record 250,000 in December." And so let's be also clear that it was the bipartisan border deal, which I was discussing, that President Biden got put in, that's actually dropped migrant crossings. Now we're back to historic lows because of that. And so everything I said was also factually correct. I think it's important to call out people that are also demonizing immigrants, and it's important that we stick to the facts. So I was just purely responding to that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So can,
Without objection.
if we're just going to have a discussion, I'd like to weigh in.
So are we going to go back to regular order, or?
I guess we should go back to regular order. We will go back to regular order now.
That's too bad. I wanted to weigh in, as long as everybody's weighing in freestyle.
Biggs, so I see has great things to say. Well, your time to ask questions will be coming up soon.